Hello, my name's Wesley, and yes, I did make this. Thanks for noticing. Today we'll be doing a very different craft. A very different craft indeed. In fact, the craft we're doing today is cooking. But first, some history. My heritage is both Métis and Russian. My mom being Métis and my dad being Russian. Throughout my life, a few people have taught me a few things. Thanks. Today we will be making borscht. This could possibly be my old Baba's recipe that was taught to my Baba, who then taught it to my mother, who wrote it down on a recipe card for me. For those of you that don't know, Baba is what we called my babushka, my grandmother. And my great-grandmother, she was known as Old Baba, because she was the older of the Babas. And because of that, the recipe I'm using not only doesn't list how many of each ingredient I should use, the directions are also vague. Now, before we begin, just a really quick disclaimer. First of all, I know that your mom, your Baba, your dad, your sister, your aunt, your uncle, all your relatives make better borscht than I ever could, and it's the best borscht you've ever had in your life. I get it, I know. Secondly, I'm aware this isn't like the borscht you've seen before, this isn't what you think it's gonna be, and that's not how you make it. First of all, I can 100% guarantee you that this is the best borscht that I've ever had in my life and the best borscht that anyone else has ever had in their life. Number two, the borscht we are making is a Doukhobor borscht. And I strongly encourage you to go online, go to the Google and type in the Doukhobors and find out a lot more about them. But don't just stop at Wikipedia, look at more things than that. Actually click on something. Don't just read the description that's listed in the search results. That's not good enough for me. I'll leave some links in the description below so you can do some research. There's some really great videos here on YouTube. But please subscribe and like to mine before you even think about going to those ones. Thank you. Thank you. So because the borscht we're making today is a Doukhobor borscht, it's going to be vegetarian and it will also contain dairy. It is inherently gluten-free. Now, if you would like to make a vegan option, please feel free to sub in any of the dairy options for your preferred substitutes. Almond milk, soy. So having said that, put on your aprons and let's make some borscht. Here is a list of things you will need. Celery, dill, potatoes, carrots, beets, an onion, green pepper, and obviously cabbage. You will also need a can of tomatoes. You could use fresh. I don't know, it's your life. Salt and pepper, a bunch of knives, milk and butter, or whatever non-dairy substitute you prefer. Some other cooking tools, and a pot to put it all. The first step to any good cooking project is to change your outfit. As you can see, I've chosen to wear my cooking apron, just in case I get confused and think I'm doing crafts. I've also chosen to wear a denim vest and a beautiful lemon shirt. I am ready to cook. So when you start making your borscht, the thing to remember is that there really is no right or wrong way. But this is the right way. So to start off with, I've already sanitized my table with a bleach water spray. Seems I had a lot of bleach left over from a previous project. So the first step before you can even begin to think about cooking anything is to wash your vegetables. Who knows what could be on them? Bugs? Might be bugs. Today I'm going to show you several different ways you can chop your vegetables using 3 different tools. Now because the recipe supplied to me by my mother does not have any amounts on it, we're going to do a little bit of guessing. This can be a fun way to cook a fun meal. If you're like me, you'll probably end up with enough to serve 20. Recipe. Let's start with our potatoes. Now the recipe I'm using calls for 3 potatoes halved and 3 potatoes diced. Unfortunately, I forgot to pick up potatoes at the grocery store yesterday, so I'm just using what I have on hand. That's the thing about borscht. Unlike some people's viewpoints, it's flexible, and I can add whatever I want to it or take away whatever I like. To chop my potatoes, I'm going to be using this kind of knife. I once saw it done on a cooking show, so I feel like this is the right kind. I'm going to do some fancy footwork. For my cube potatoes, I will first start by cutting the potato across. I like to leave the skin on because I think it's delicious and adds a nice texture. Some people like to save the skins and fry them up. Oh, I should have done that. So now that my potatoes in beautiful halves like this, little slices, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I'm just going to cut it into cubes. You always want to be careful when using a knife not to cut yourself. And if for whatever reason you don't feel you're capable of using a knife or you're not old enough to be using a knife, Please seek assistance of someone who can. I should also mention I've washed my hands like 87 times before I touched any food. Now that my potatoes are chopped, I'm going to put them in this bowl. Now, because my other potato says it needs to be halved, I'm going to chop it into quarters. I will also put it in the bowl. While I was at the store, I was sure to pick up the weirdest green pepper I could find. I feel it makes my dish just a little bit more fun. I'm going to start by cutting my green pepper in half. And then carefully looking inside for bugs. There may not actually be bugs in here, but one time I saw on the internet a video of worms coming out of a green pepper, and ever since I've been very sure to always check. The easiest way to remove the insides of a green pepper is to just take your fingers and pull. Always be sure to have a compost on hand. You want to make sure to get all your seeds out. If you don't, someone might choke. Now that my green pepper is cut in half, I'm gonna grate it. Isn't that great? Once you have an amount of green pepper that you're comfortable with, or you've just run out of patience with grating it, you're gonna want to chop up the little extra chunks left over. Now let's grate some carrots. Now that our carrots are grated, let's chop some celery. Now keep in mind, you don't want to use all your celery. You don't want your borscht to be celery. It's a good celery pun somewhere. I'm gonna find it. This part's gross. I'm gonna leave these little bushy bits on, because they're delicious and perhaps add a little extra fiber. For my delicious smelling dill, I don't really plan to chop it, but I will cut off the large chunky parts of the stalk. Actually, I'm going to cut it in half. And get rid of these bits because they don't look very appetizing. Now that I've made a large mess of my table and my bowl has begun to look like a beautiful cornucopia of vegetables and color, I'm gonna need another bowl. So now that we've chopped all our other vegetables, it's time to move on to my favorite tool of all, my mandolin slicer. In my house, we call this a hat, simply because this. See? So a mandolin slicer is super cool. Kind of looks like a bit of a weird ram. As you can see, it has a little blade here, and all we do is put our vegetable in here, the little hat presses it down, and we just slide it across. And as we do that, it's gonna slice. But wait, there's more. My mandolin slicer has knobs on the side so I can adjust the depth. Some of them have attachments that slide in and out, and others, well, I actually don't know. But mine has knobs on the side. Sure, that looks good. And now, this other knob also is quite cool. As you might see, when I turn it, bam! Oh yeah. Spikes come out. Don't back over that, vegetables. I'm gonna start with my onion. Now, if your vegetable is too big to fit into your mandolin slicer, you can always chop it by hand, or you can chop it down to a size that will fit. Remember, if you don't have any of the tools I have here, you probably shouldn't be doing this. No, you can do it. You can just use a regular knife or a cheese grater to grate up your vegetables really small. Try not to cry. Everything's gotta be slippery. All right, here we go. As you can see, my onions came out perfect. So now that we're done crying about our onions, let's cut some beets. So I'm cutting these beets so they'll come out looking like hickory sticks or matchsticks. Now this doesn't mean you can sub in hickory sticks or matchsticks for beets. Trust me, it's not gonna work. My favorite thing about beets is that when you cut them, they make everything around them turn pink. Now that I've finished up with those ridiculous beets, I can begin the arduous task of shredding my cabbage. For my project, I only want to use half a cabbage. Now before I shred my cabbage, I'm going to remove this terrible solid mass in the middle. So once you've pulled that out, you can save it and sneak it into the dish of someone you don't like. So I'm going to shred my cabbage by just very simply cutting it into little strips. Now that all my vegetables are ready, I can move on to the kitchen. Now that all my vegetables are prepped, I can finally begin cooking. Now in my recipe it says that I'm going to boil all my vegetables together until my potatoes are tender enough to mash. So I'm going to begin by putting all my vegetables into my pot of water. It's half a pot of water, half a pot of water. If you're making a small borscht, definitely use like small pot, smaller amount of vegetables. Don't be crazy like this. I'm feeding 37 people. I'm not feeding 37 people. So I'm just gonna pour my vegetables into the water. Now my beets and onions. And let's not forget our can of tomato. You could probably also use fresh tomatoes, but I've never tried that, so good luck. Now that all our vegetables are in the pot, we can now begin waiting for them to boil. This might be a good time to do some things like balance your checkbook, do your taxes, reflect on all the poor decisions you made up until this point, clean your bathroom, write a one-act play, stand here and watch vegetables boil, go for a walk around the block. Actually, don't do that. Don't leave it unattended. It's now been about 20 minutes and my pot has started to boil. This means I now have to take a more active role in paying attention to it. You'll have to do periodic checks to make sure that your potatoes are cooked. I do it by fishing out a potato, poking it with a fork, and seeing if it's ready to be mashed. Stupid potatoes. If you're like me and your kitchen staff couldn't make it in today, now is a good time to start all the cleanup from your prep. It's now been about 25 minutes and I will begin the process of extracting my potatoes from the boiling water. To do this, I will be using a fine mesh sieve. Now watch as I fish out the potatoes. There's about 8 solid pieces that I know of. If you can't find them all, that's okay. It just means one of your guests is in for a potato-y surprise. I, on the other hand, have found all my potatoes, so I may continue on to the next step. Once the potatoes have been retrieved from the water, you may then begin to mash them. Unfortunately, my potato masher is in the shop, so instead I whipped mine up with some butter and cream. Pretty much just the standard way you'd make mashed potatoes. Now that all my potatoes are mashed, I can add them back to the pot. So now that I've added my potatoes back into the pot, I can finally add my cabbage. Now that I've added my cabbage to the pot, I'm going to add a little bit more cream until it's the right color. You probably won't know what the right color is if you've never made this before, but I will be sure to zoom in and show you what the right color is. Don't forget the salt and pepper. Delicious. Now that all my ingredients have been added to the pot, I can let my borscht boil and amalgamate until things taste just right. I'm going to come back and check it at 10-minute intervals. It's important that if it needs more water, that I add more water. At this point, I don't think it does. I'm also looking for the cabbage to be as tender as possible without turning to mush, because nobody likes a mushy cabbage. So now that my borscht has been simmering for 15 minutes, the house sufficiently smells like my babas. It's done! Now that we've successfully made borscht, I'd like to thank everyone for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, eat your borscht, you're wasting away to nothing.